All right. Hello and welcome to Long Toss, everybody. I'm Scott Billiford, normally joined by Adam Mack, but he is at a family reunion in Kamloops. So this is episode 214. We normally go live every single Sunday. We are not live. My computer just doesn't have the capability for it. But I mean, with so much stuff happening, we figured we better at least lay something down. So despite it not being live, go ahead and put your comments down and maybe we'll get to those in mailbag on Tuesday. Very thrilled to be joined by our regular Jen. Jen, how's your weekend been?
It's been good. I went to yesterday's game. A friend from Twitter or X, as it's now called, apparently. A friend from Twitter very kindly gave me his seats to the game on Saturday, and they were excellent seats. So
lovely. And a good game to catch.
A lot happened yesterday. Things we need to talk about.
Yes, absolutely. Also joined by another regular, Joel. Good to have you back, buddy. How things going? You seem to be keeping cool. You got your AC right behind you there. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm over at a friend's place. I'll be able to be here for about like 90 minutes, and then I have Oppenheimer tickets. So I'm heading out to go see a bomb. So.
There you go. To be classy, I like it.
Yeah.
Little disappointed you're not doing Barbieheimer.
I took my friend's kid to see Barbie.
Good for you.
Yeah, okay. And she's 7, so that might not have. I don't know if it's designed for 7-year-olds.
I know. I saw it too. And I was a little surprised that I was like, wow, this is very adult orientated.
Yeah, I was doing this, like, squeezing the ears a bunch. It's like, what are you doing? I'm like, I think I made a mistake.
Well, anybody who would have been into Barbie potentially is my age.
Yeah.
Right? I still had the concept that it was like forever for 7-year-old girls. So those girls from the 50s when that thing originated are not 7 anymore. So.
And finally, last but not least, the clean shaven. Just rolling with a bare chin here, Chris. Good to have you back on the show, buddy.
Yeah, it's misleading my Twitter profile. I guess these days I have to get a new avatar made up with a clean shaven face. But I'm well. Thank you for having me, and excited to chat some Blue Jays baseball with you all.
Lots to get to, too. We'll obviously break down this Angels and Blue Jays series. The Jays finishing 4 for 2, going against 2 pretty darn good California teams there. Playoff race. We will get into all the implications. Huge Baltimore series ahead of us here. Who's going to win the AL East? We will break it all down. Matt Chapman had quite a blow up in game 1 with John Schneider. So I just wanted to pick everyone's brain on just what they felt about the entire situation. Alejandro Kirk is getting hot and at about the best time possible. We'll talk trade deadline stuff. Scherzer to the Rangers. How big could Texas go? We'll do a temperature check on how everyone feels John Schneider is doing in his first full year as a manager. We'll look into the National League playoff scene. But before we do any of that, coming down the pipe just about an hour ago, the Blue Jays make a pretty major acquisition to this bullpen, trading their number 7 prospect, Semro Burse, and number 11, Adam Kloffenstein. So a couple of double-A pitchers. Semro Burse, 21, Adam Kloffenstein, 22. They do have some good upside and actually gave up quite a bit to get this guy. But Jordan Hicks, probably the highest end reliever on the market, or at least one of them, not named Josh Hader. And the dude throws 105 miles an hour. So let's just jump right into it here. We'll start with you, Jen. How did you feel about this trade?
This is great. I mean, this to me signals that this front office is going for it, right? Mm-hmm. We talked a few weeks ago how they might just stand pat and sort of, let things sort itself out as Chad Green comes off the IL and Ryu comes back, and what are you doing with all of these different people? And this move, I mean, I know it was somewhat necessitated by Jordan Romano going on the IL, but to give up what they gave up for a rental, this is not the MO of this front office. And so, it is quite a surprising move from that point of view. I think it sends a message to the rest of the league that they are absolutely in it to win it this year. And it just makes me really excited for, between now and Tuesday, right? To see what else they do to add to this lineup.
That's exactly how I felt, Jen. And that is a really good point that, yeah, maybe their hand was forced a little bit with Romano going down, but I still think they could have literally sold and gotten away with not bolstering the bullpen. They've had an incredible bullpen all season long, one of the top in Major League Baseball. And to see them go and bolster an area where they could have skirted that or definitely gone at a less quality level, right? Try and grab someone that's going to cost less. Now, there are a couple of interesting things to take into account with this trade. Number one, both Semro Burst and Adam Kloffenstein would need to have been added to the 40-man roster in November because they are Rule 5 eligible, and both guys would have been taken in the Rule 5 draft. Both dudes are probably going to be major league pitchers, so definitely not giving up scraps to get Jordan Hicks. Chris, when you saw them add this bullpen piece, where do you see him slotting in to this bullpen? Is he automatically going to be your 8th, 9th inning high leverage guy?
I think so. Like with Romano being out, I think he's a de facto kind of answer there to close games for now. Especially Swanson's kind of been a little hit and miss as he's been looked a little bit tired lately.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, I was talking about this with a friend just before we started here, and he said, "Do you think Hicks will still be the closer when Romano comes back?" And which is, I think, is a fair question, even if assuming Hicks gets closing opportunities. But I think his performance as a Blue Jay will dictate that. I mean, I think if Hicks comes in and strikes out 90% of the batters that he's faced while Romano's been out, it might be a case where Romano, they would say, "Okay, Jordan, we want you to, maybe we do a matchup thing. Maybe we just look at things a little bit differently. Who knows?" But having another late inning weapon of that caliber, I think is just awesome as you look at going into the playoffs, especially. And with Romano being out, it's even more important because it'll just help them get there.
The other caveat here, too, that signals this team is going for it, other than the fact they traded some actual prospects to get a rental player, is that they made the decision to DFA Mitch White. They swallowed the mistake they made last year. This is an organization that's all about asset management, and they chose to go with the best pieces available for this bullpen. Joel, what did you feel about that? And maybe, Joel, if you want to touch on just the really cheap, but what is turning out to be a very good acquisition in Cabrera out of St. Louis from just a few days ago.
Yeah, that's a really interesting one because his start of the year, you were getting a guy whose ERA was well in the 5s, but for us, it's been a really great pickup ever since he got here. I think with Pearson also going down, I really feel like Hicks kind of long term will slot more into a potential like 2-inning role. Like he's a guy who can come out throwing 105, but he can also throw 2 innings, which is like, for Cabrera, for Trevor Richards, for Swanson, who's looked a little bit tired over the last month or so. Just having that arm, and especially the fact that you're in situations with Kikuchi where Kikuchi very rarely runs out those extra innings. Manoa seems like you're hoping to get 4 out of him. He's almost like not a full-on starter at this point. You're hoping he gets into the 6th, but because 2 of your starter options may be out of the game considerably earlier than the rest, it's nice that you can have that guy who bridges to the end of the bullpen, as opposed to using 3 guys in the middle. Hicks can come in if he's been rested properly, give you 6 and 7, and then you go on to, when Romano's healthy, then you go on to your standard guys to close out the game. So right now he's definitely going to be used in those high leverage spots, but the fact that he can do 2 innings here and there at, his strikeout rate is through the roof. If
59 Ks, by the way, 59 Ks already this
like
year over
innings?
41 innings. Yeah.
So
he's in the 92nd percentile for K rate.
Yeah, and if they feel confident that they can get him more in the strike zone, which has to be the Jays' approach because the walks are a little bit up. His whip is about 1.5, but that's a lot of He's walking about one batter every 2 innings. So he knocks that down. The stuff is incredible. So maybe it's that concept that they feel like they can get him more in the zone and then be even more effective than he already has been this year. So yeah,
I mean,
I'm all for it, right?
Yeah, like Eric Swanson has proven you don't need high velo to be a high leverage guy and get outs. But, and this is a very big but, okay? Nate Pearson broke the record for the fastest pitch ever thrown by a Toronto Blue Jay just this year, hitting 101.1. Okay. Jordan Hicks has already exceeded 105 miles an hour 6 times this season. The dude has gas like Toronto Blue Jays fans have not seen in this pen ever. Chris, when you look at some of the high leverage guys in the game, velo's a big deal, and having that big arm back there, it's a big deal, right?
Yeah, it is. And I mean, as the game continues to evolve, it seems like it becomes more important. As human beings evolve, they just get better. And I think back to the Chipper Jones interview, and I'm sure you probably all saw it going through social media, but he was talking about in today's game that he'd maybe hit 200 or something like that if he was still playing, which I think is pretty modest of him to say as a Hall of Famer. But the point is that velocity is more important than ever. And when we see, like when I watch this Blue Jays team, there's certain guys that when there are pitchers throwing in that kind of realm, that you just feel like they don't have a chance. And it just gets to the point where there's just the elite hitters that can get those guys. So if Hicks is throwing in that kind of range and in the zone consistently, meeting his potential, he could be a lethal weapon for them.
Just to put it into perspective, Alec Manoa is averaging about 92 miles an hour on his fastball this year. Like, to be able to go to the bullpen with a guy who's throwing between 92 and 95 and still add 10 miles an hour to the fastball coming in, like, that is pretty exceptional stuff. And it is pretty exciting to see.
He'll throw 105 on the sinker. Like, it's not a straight pitch. That's not his 105 mile an hour is not on a line. It's got considerable movement to it. So, and they were doing that. I don't know if anybody saw this. A-Rod was on MLB Network, and they were talking about the 3 levels of the strike zone and the batting average in the 3 levels of the strike zone. Like, bottom third is about 230, middle of the strike zone is about 270. But anything in the top third that's over 97 miles an hour, Major League Baseball is batting like 165 against it this year, something like that. It's just like, and that's 97.
Right.
We're not talking about 105 throwing it up there at the letters. So that's a weapon that is, like Chris said, it takes the absolute most elite hitters in the world to barrel that ball up. So,
you know what I'm excited about that is just kind of a forgotten aspect of this trade is imagine bringing in Jordan Hicks after 3 guys have just faced Trevor Richards, or vice versa. Like, those two together are now going to be just like this combo that I think we're going to see a lot of. And I think we might even see Hicks coming in the 7th and then Richards and then Romano and really mess with timing. I'm going to read off the bullpen arms right now with the Toronto Blue Jays: Jordan Hicks, Jordan Romano, the Jordans, Eric Swanson, Yoenis Cabrera, Tim Meza, Jimmy Garcia, Trevor Richards, Nate Pearson, and probably Chad Green is going to make his way back. Now, I know I'm biased, and I know I'm being a homer, but Jen, can you think of any better bullpens just off the top of your head that blows this out of the water? I don't think it exists.
This is an elite bullpen. And a number of the tweets that I've seen since this trade went down today from, the national reporters, as well as people, who are from other fan bases, was that this bullpen is legitimately scary right now. Not enough can be said about that, I don't think, right? Because we all know that pitching wins games in the playoffs, right? And that bullpen has to be lights out. And I think that the Jays front office just went out and did that today. It's been very good. It has been a very good bullpen, but I think they just put the icing on the cake with this trade today. And I think legitimately, I mean, people have sat up and taken notice.
You know what wins playoff games? defense, pitching, and an elite bullpen. And I think the Blue Jays have just checked off all three of those. Now all they need to do is go out and get a bat. Joel, what's your confidence level on this organization going out and getting someone who can hit lefties?
It's not the hardest thing to acquire, especially like you're proving that you're willing to go get a rental. So I'm a singular bat that crushes lefties, like that's attainable. That isn't, we're not talking about getting a 3-hole hitter or an ace or anything like that. A lot of teams, that's what they need come playoff time, is somebody to be their core pitcher. Like look at, like Texas is going up. They got Montgomery as well today, having grabbed Scherzer. So it's like, you know, we're in a much better position needing a righty when 70% of the league is right-handed. And so I'm not afraid of that. It's who you go after, but like I think there's a lot of options, and I don't feel like that's going to be too tough of a spot to fill. I'm not scared of that.
Randall Grichuk, come on down.
Yeah, you know what? And it's funny because everyone hates that idea. The only way, Chris, could you handle Randall Grichuk if he's brought in on top of another good bat that's going to take the majority here? Like, absolutely no scenario.
I mean, on top of,
I mean, we're kind of paying his salary anyways. He could come sit on the bench, right?
No, I really, no. I mean, I wouldn't hate it if Grichuk came in. I just really think that there's better options. Even if he's, I don't know. I want to see a guy that doesn't, like, when I think about what does this team need, they need, for offense, they need somebody that can deliver with runners in scoring position. That's been the gaping wound for the entire season, right? And so I don't want another high strikeout guy. Like when I think about who I want to come in and fill that role, that's easier said than done. But I agree with you, Joel. I think it's a very attainable thing for the front office to do. And I agree with what Jen had said kind of early on, that this trade for Hicks is not something that kind of represents this front office's MO. They're clearly in a win now mentality, as they should be. And so I think the least they can do is go get somebody like a Tommy Pham or a Mark Canha. And given what they did today, I wouldn't be surprised if they were more aggressive. Maybe they do call Seattle and say, we want Teo back. Like, let me know what you want, and let's figure this out. Like, I don't know. I'm not saying that's what the answer is, but I do think they're going to be more aggressive. And today, I feel like was a signal.
Jen, has today upped your confidence in them actually going out and getting somebody who moves the needle, like an Andrew McCutchen or like Chris brought up a Teo?
That's exactly what I was going to say, was that I wasn't exactly excited about the trade deadline, in the sense that I just didn't see the Blue Jays necessarily. I thought they'd maybe add something minor but it would be a very underwhelming trade deadline. Now I'm of the belief of the complete opposite. And, it makes sense, right? Like, if you really look at what has been going on here, we've talked about the possibility of Ross Atkins being on the hot seat if this team doesn't make the playoffs this season, right? You look at Bo is having an incredible season, and, he may not be on this team in a couple of years. Vlad may not be on this team in a couple of years. Matt Chapman, you've probably only got for this season, and so on and so forth. And so you have to absolutely make the most of what you have when you have it. And you just can't squander these types of opportunities, right? And so the fact that they went against type and shelled out for a rental absolutely has me, confident that they are going to address the other concerns.
And that's a really good point, that this does go against their MO. This is not philosophically the way we normally watch this front office operate, which is to give up actual assets to acquire contract that are ending, right? Like a rental in the purest form possible. And when you look at last year, it was a very underwhelming trade deadline, although it's funny because now I look at it and I'm like, where the hell would this team be without Whit Merrifield, who just wound up being the most under-the-radar acquisition at that deadline that I think any of us could have expected. I know that this was tweeted out by a friend of the show and just Twitter aficionado when it comes to stats and threads, but Chris Black tweeted out about Whit Merrifield, and he says a 300 average and 20 stolen base season in Blue Jays history. And therethe's only 10 guys, and nobody has done it since Shannon Stewart in 2000 and 2001 and Sean Green in 1999. This is we're talking over 20 years since the Blue Jays has had a guy who hits for average and has the kind of base running acumen that Whit Merrifield has. They just put him at the top of the lineup. Joel, Springer in the 5 hole, Whit Merrifield hitting leadoff. Are you enjoying this new batting alignment that they had for this series against the Angels? You're muted, by the way, buddy.
Yeah, I'm trying not to say, I don't want you to hear the air conditioning. Yeah, no, I've been on that train for 3 years now that Springer should be lower in the lineup. I honestly felt like his first 2 years, though, all those solo home runs he hit, if there could have been a chance that some of them were 2-run, 3-run homers, that might have moved the needle in those seasons. So it's tough because his OPS is down near 700, but the fact that Whit comes up, hits 300, not just that, but the fact that he can do it for you at second base, and then the next day he can do it for you in left field, and the maneuverability to have him, it's like you can't really do that. Most of your outfielders are standard outfielders. Biggio can move a little bit, but like the fact that he can be your leadoff hitter at second base or left field really just allows the team to kind of move everybody around. And then Danny, I've always been on the mindset that Danny should be higher in the lineup. So the fact that he's starting to get up there, I hate when he's hitting 8th. Like in the last few games, I've seen him in the 8th spot, and I'm just like, that's the only clutch guy on the team. That's the only guy that I put that definite clutch check mark to. So him hitting in the 8 hole is just baffles me every time it happens. Seeing Kirk come around too, like, yeah, no, Whit in the leadoff spot pushes everybody down, and it gives you that length that you need out of this lineup. And yeah, it's so going to be an interesting situation now because, like, does everybody think that we have to pick him up for next year? Like, is the 18 million kind of a must at this point? Can we lose Whit Merrifield? Like, I would have never at the beginning of the year. I'm like, he's probably leaving. Put up a good season, he's probably leaving. But 320 stolen bases in second base and left field. Can we afford to lose that?
I don't think that we're going to see them take the option. I don't think that they're going to pay Whit Merrifield 18 million, but I can absolutely see them going to him and being like, stay, let's do 25 over 2 or something like that. I don't know if his numbers really profile as a guy who's going to make 15 to 20 million a year, but I would love to see him on this team for another couple of years. I mean, he is 34, so there's a little bit of risk there, but I mean, what he has done since joining the Toronto Blue Jays has been far exceeded anything anyone expected, I think. Let's get into this Angels and Jays series. Obviously a very disappointing end to it, but Chris, taking 2 of 3 from the Angels, do you chalk this up as a win?
Yeah, I think you have to. Looking on the outside in, anytime you can win a series, especially against another team that's considered a contender for a playoff spot, that's always a win. But for any of us that follow this team closely, it was kind of a microcosm of the season where you just go, but it could have been so much better, and so that's just kind of the way this whole season has gone for the Blue Jays. So we just have to hope that by the time we reach the playoffs that they've just sort of gotten all those wasted opportunities out of their system. But overall, I mean, I can't complain. If you told me they were going to pick up 4 wins in 6 games in LA, I'd take that 9 times out of 10.
And it's so weird that is how this season has gone, because if you literally go season or series by series and all, like you're saying, there is that wall where you're just like, they're doing it. Finally, they found what they need to find to be the team we think they can be. And then something like today happens. But honestly, if you just kind of pull back the microscope a little bit,
Yep.
this has been a really good season. This has been, and
Yep.
I know there's a lot of things about this season that when you look at the numbers, you're like, this doesn't feel at all like the numbers. And I'm going to give you a few of them here. This team has the best record in the American League since May 15th. What?
Yeah.
Just like literally just the best record in the American League since the middle of May. Okay. Vladimir Guerrero Jr., when runners are in scoring position with 2 outs, is hitting over 400. Does not feel that way at all. If you were to tell me Vladimir Guerrero Jr. is literally the most clutch hitter with 2 outs right now on the Blue Jays, I would tell you you're lying. Bo Bichette with 2 outs, hitting 350 with runners in scoring position. Again, does not feel that way at all. The only guy that feels clutch is Danny Jansen, and his numbers don't compare to Vladdy and Bo. Why do you think that is, Jen? Like, when you look at this season, it doesn't... 2021 felt like it was our year. Like, there were moments where I was like, this team's going to do it. And I really haven't felt that way yet. But I feel ridiculous saying that because you look at the numbers and where they are and everything, they're great. They're doing what they should do.
I think it's because the losses have been so disappointing, right? Like there have been some absolutely crushing losses this season. You know, it's one thing to see a game that is pitched well and, you know, runners are being cashed in from scoring position and you just get beat by the other team, right? That's baseball. That's whatever. But so many of the losses this season, I think, have just been so soul crushing that it does seem like a worse season than it actually is.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really what it is. And because the low is so low.
Because they give up when it's the 9th inning and they're up by 4 runs, 7-3, they'll blow it, right?
Like
it's a 1-1 game and they could put the nail in the coffin that is the Angels and somehow they let them win one. Like
how many games do you figure off the top of your head that they've lost that they should have won?
At least a dozen.
Right. I was going to say 10 to 15. So there you go. A dozen, right?
Yeah.
Add 12 more wins, to this team.
Yeah.
No one is complaining about a thing.
No.
Yeah.
Oh, and even half that would almost give them the division lead. Would give them the division lead, right? Like, or at least close to it. Like, yeah, that's just it. It's just I agree with you totally, Jen. I think it's those losses are just so frustrating. You get every team gets beat, but there's just so many of those games they should have won by just a simple move the runner over, or don't make a boneheaded play as a base runner, or just cash one extra guy in when you have 12 guys in scoring position in a game and only score one run. Like there's just so many games. And that's what I think, like, that's where the pessimists on Twitter, and I understand where it comes from. I think that's where the pessimism comes from, especially regarding the playoffs, because it's like you got to be able to cash in those moments. You got to be able to take advantage of that. And so I'm with you, Scott. There's times where I'm like, man, this team just doesn't have it. And then you look at the record and you look at everything, and it's like, oh, I don't know. Maybe I'm just negative. I don't know. Whatever.
Yeah.
I guess I'll just...
No, it's been a really weird season. Joel, just taking the microscope and just zooming out, okay? Just taking a full glance of this season. If you were to find out in April, someone was like, listen, and we'll see, because Baltimore, if they lose tonight against the Yankees, they're going to be 4.5 up on the Blue Jays going into this 4-game series. If you were told that the Jays were 4.5 out of the division July 30th, would you be happy with that? Would you feel like they're kind of where they should be without knowing the teams or what's gone on or the story? Just a quick flash at the standings April 1st. Would you be all right being 4.5 out of the division, holding a wild card spot?
4.5 out of the division, holding the wild card. Yeah, I would feel a little bit disappointed because I feel like this is division time. Like we should be there. Like they made moves to be not 4 games back, but to be that division leader, right? And it's tough when Baltimore is the one who's past you. You know, it's like when you're sitting ahead of the Yankees, when you're sitting ahead of the Red Sox, usually for the Blue Jays, that's going to denote a pretty great season. But in this year, weirdly, Baltimore has jumped from the bottom to the top, and we're kind of in that weird situation. But your
Are they
records
catchable,
against
Joel?
Baltimore, oh, I think they're catchable. 4.5 games is incredibly catchable with 60 left. Like that should be, you know, it's very possible, especially when you've got games in hand against those teams. It's very much doable. I think the kind of the weird thing that you sit back and you look at the team was that the 21 team, a little bit of the last year's team, was kind of designed for the knockout punch. Like they could beat you in the first inning, right? They were, if you remember the statistics that they would always bring up, they're like, this team against first pitches, they hit 370 against the first pitch, and they're hyper aggressive, and they're looking to drive that first pitch that they see. And it kind of felt like that was the entire team's mentality. And that when somebody was struggling, there was always 2 or 3 guys that were absolutely on fire to carry the team, no matter who it was, right? It felt like the Blue Jays relied on that type of offense. So the discouraging part really is not landing those kill shots, like bases loaded, and you don't cash any of that in. It seems to be a routine thing where guys are on second and third and they don't come in, and yeah, so it's a situation where we used to be a team that would win in the first or second inning. The game would be over. You'd put 6 runs on the board, and then you'd cruise the rest of the way. You put 2 more up, and you'd win, 8-4, and you wouldn't really care. Now every single piece is so intrinsically valuable because the run production is less. So you need 4 or 5 bullpen arms to come out and be lights out. Nobody can have a hiccup because you're usually in a 1-run game. So it's kind of like, it's not just that the record is where it is, but it's how the winning is done. And it's also the inconsistencies of the change of the stadium. Like, how many home runs does Vladdy have at home yet at this point? It's still incredibly low, right? It's the idea that the stadium changed and maybe the team's approach within the stadium became opposite field. I don't ever think that should be your approach. I think you should be trying to find a pitch you can handle and handle it to the pull side as best as you can. So like the inconsistencies of like a total change in approach, more defense, more running, all of those things kind of led to a much more inconsistent way of winning. Where the way we used to, like we said, the standard way that the Blue Jays would win was you could trust that offense routinely, and the bullpen didn't need to be great, but they would throw away games. Now it's more like we play every game like a playoff game. Every game we're fighting and using everything at our disposal to try to win that game by 1 run, which is what you have to do. So might as well get used to that style of winning now, when that's the only way you can really win in the postseason.
And I think one of the parts of this equation that has diminished offense to the extent that we've seen in 2023 is when this front office made the moves that they were making. I think they truly viewed Alejandro Kirk as that number 4, number 5 in the lineup guy who's going to hit 15 to 20 out. He's going to constantly be flirting with 300 and is going to hit doubles. And he really hasn't been that guy this year. But my goodness, in the last 15 games, has he ever been incredible? And if you even zoom out even more, in the last 7 games, he's been like out of this world. He's hitting 545 batting average. He's got 3 home runs, 6 RBIs, an OPS of 1,600. I mean, the dude is lighting it up. And obviously we can't expect that level to continue. But Chris, how important is Alejandro Kirk to this team and providing some offense that he hasn't so far to this point?
It's a great question. I mean, when he's hot like he's been lately, he has the ability to be a huge contributor. But it'll be interesting to see, especially as we talk about looking for that right-handed bat, because to me, Kirk's most obvious role right now on this team, besides splitting some catching duties, but is to bat against left-handed starting pitching. Because for me, I want my majority starter as a catcher to be Danny Jansen right now. And so if the Blue Jays go out and get another right-handed bat, that's going to be expected to be, a DH, extra outfielder kind of guy. And Brandon Belt continues to fill the role as a platoon. It's interesting. I mean, right now they're going to ride the hot hand. Of course they are, and they should, because Kirk's swinging the bat well. But he's going to have to keep playing well, or I wouldn't be surprised if he kind of gets not squeezed out of the picture, but he becomes a less prominent player on the team as we go down the stretch run here.
I love that you're bringing that up, because obviously if they do bring in a right-handed bat, there's going to be at bats that are lost. Jen, who do you think is going to be the victim of this if they do find a guy to come in?
Whoever's not hitting. Whoever's not hitting. I mean, it's asset management is really challenging, right? I mean, if you look at so right now, let me ask you guys, who right now would you want to remove from the lineup? Like, based on performance, who are you pulling from the lineup right now to put in that righty bat?
I mean, Dalton Varsho has been a black hole. He's definitely showing a little bit of life in the last few games, but yeah, I mean, he's number one on my list, I think. Chapman's coming around, which is nice. Kirk's been hot. So those were guys that were definitely on my list 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, but they've kind of put it together lately.
Joel,
Kirk
makes sense. Sorry, Kirk makes sense to be the guy to lose at bats, especially if he does cool off, because you've already got Danny Jansen as a catcher, right? So Kirk's only other role would be as a DH, right? But if you've got a lefty on the mound, you are going to, if you go out and you get a guy who can hit lefties, that's who you're putting in the lineup. So it does seem to me like Kirk would be the one to lose playing time. But I think down the stretch, you also have to look at who's producing and who isn't. And I mean, I don't even know what to say about Dalton Varsho, to be completely honest. They pinch hit for him because he's not hitting. When they put him into pinch hit, he strikes out. The guy just right now can't do anything right.
They have acted really weird with Dalton Varsho too. Yeah. And I know you kind of touched on it there. Like, there are just certain things throughout the season that stand out in my mind about him. Like when they removed Whit Merrifield to bring in Varsho and then not get him to bunt. This was last week. Varsho does have some skill sets that a lot of other guys on this team don't have. And to not use them seems really dumb.
Sometimes you just got to just plainly put it out there. And that's exactly.
Well, and we are going to do a little temperature check on John Schneider later in the episode, right? Yes. And I think that's kind of where that fits in. But yes, the management of Dalton Varsho has, in a lot of cases, been very, very puzzling.
So let's sort of veer towards that. I do want to talk about an incident that happened on Friday where Shohei Ohtani in the first inning comes up, nobody on base. He hits a solo home run, and first inning ends. And then we see Matt Chapman, which really surprised me because you don't normally see a lot of emotion coming out of Chappie, literally get angry and get in John Schneider's face. And I mean, of course, John Boy does what John Boy does and broke it down beautifully, but there's no hiding what he said, right? And he was just like, what are you doing? What are we doing? The only guy who ever hits on this team is Ohtani. Why didn't you walk him? I'm paraphrasing here, but this is pretty much what the breakdown was. Personally, I didn't like it, and it could just be I'm old, and I honestly just feel like, listen, I'm all for that. I would love it if Matt Chapman takes John Schneider aside and gives him his opinion on how they should handle this guy who's hurting the team. But to do it so publicly, I didn't like it. Chris, I see you nodding along here. What were your feelings on this whole incident?
Well, first of all, like before I say what I think from the manager side of it, I agree with Chapman, and I understand why he was frustrated.
So do I.
And because I yeah. Anyway, we could just say I agree with him and I understand why he's frustrated. However, if I'm John Schneider, if a player comes and yells at me like that in the dugout, then his ass is getting sat on the bench, and I'm sending a message that I'm in charge, and whatever the case may be. And I'm not saying that you need some sort of like dictator or whatever, but I don't like to me, when I've watched Schneider's body of work this year, again, it's hard to criticize him given overall you look at the season and how they've done, especially since he took over last year. But I want to see more respect for the manager than that. You know, like I don't want to see a player going up, even if it's a veteran like Matt Chapman who has a respected voice. I still don't want to see them going up and swearing in their manager's face when they know TV cameras are everywhere. Like you said, you can take them aside and go, yeah, man, what are we doing? Why are we pitching to him? You don't have to scream at him. What the are we doing? What are we doing?
And
you know,
that's a
to
really
me,
great
that was
point.
a scary thing to me, is like, how much respect does Schneider command in that clubhouse? That's the question that I asked.
That was the number one thing that stood out to me too, because you know darn well Chappie is cognizant of the fact that there's cameras everywhere. He's played too long in the league not to. And I mean, when you just kind of look at the whole league, I know that I really, it rubbed me the wrong way earlier in the season when Oliver Marmol came out and called Tyler O'Neill out for dogging it around third. And even if that was true, right? It just felt like a really weird place to do it publicly. And I am going to bring up another example here, which was Wander Franco doing his little flip mid-game, right? He flips the ball up, makes the throw, right? The media comes out. They ask Kevin Cash, how did you feel about that? Kevin says, I love it, right? Wander, what a joy. Just entertainment. Loved it. Have we seen Wander Franco do that since? We have not. Have we seen Wander Franco get benched for not maybe being the team guy that he should be? We have, and it has all been within that clubhouse. Nobody's made a big deal out of it, and that's just the way that I would kind of want to see that dealt with. Joel, when you look at around baseball at other incidents like I just brought up, do you think it looks negative on the Blue Jays when something like that happens so publicly?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I never first of all, like I get that Ohtani's the dangerous guy on that lineup, but it was like first inning, Gosman's on the mound. Like you're gonna tell Gosman to walk somebody? That's Kevin Gosman. Are you kidding me? Like I think Kevin Gosman, like, what are you doing? There's nobody on base. There's a solo shot. We won the game 4-1. Like what in the first, I don't get me wrong, he is the guy who's scary on that team. Maybe you approach him a little, tentatively in a 0-0 game, but at no point do I want Kevin Gosman not going after the best hitters on any team. He's our ace. He's leading the league in strikeouts. He gave up one. Wow, okay. I didn't understand it one bit. Like Chris said, don't get me wrong, there's a spot this year where Schneider's made a few mistakes, but this is like I said earlier, this is a manager who's having to manage a team that is gear shifting in the way that they win, right? And that's coming from that's coming from your GM, that's coming from your president of baseball operations, that we want to win in a different way. So you are a part of this organization, all these players and the success that they had, but we don't want to win that way this year. So a lot of the Snyder's put in a position where he has to kind of evolve his style of management within a year where the team has been changed around him. He's made a few mistakes, but to be where we are, I can't see really blasting the manager with 60 games left and having the rest of the team see that, have the rest of the league see that, because it instantly became like the number one story in that game. In the middle of that game, I'm watching Twitter blow up and everybody's breaking down that moment, and you're like, there's a solo shot in the first, and we're looking stupid.
You really bring up a point that I hadn't really put much thought into, which is just like, yeah, it's our ace on the mound. Why wouldn't in the first inning with nobody on, you go after him? And it's so easy to blow stuff like this out of proportion when you're a fan or an analyst or the media and all that sort of stuff. It's really easy to do. But do you think, Jen, that it's possible that rubbed Kevin Gausman the wrong way. Like, I just wonder, like, how big of a deal this was. And who knows, like, it probably was addressed afterwards. I know John Schneider said all the right things, but with a riff like that, do you think people could take it personal?
It's possible. Absolutely. My speculative interpretation of it all. So first of all, to do that publicly, knowing the cameras are right there, and the cameras are right in their faces on either side of the dugout.
They have drones, Jen. Like,
I would assume that this is not the first time Chapman and Schneider have exchanged words. I would assume it's not the first time that Chapman has gone to Schneider and disagreed with decisions that were made in game. I'm assuming all of the rest of it has gone on behind closed doors. So I don't know what led to Chapman deciding to do this publicly on Friday night. I'm just guessing that we didn't go from 0 to 100, right?
mm-hmm.
Doesn't mean, I'm not suggesting that makes it okay or makes it right. It makes me wonder what has gone on behind closed doors, because a while back on this show, when we were talking about John Schneider, one of the things that I said was that, it's one thing that he has managed a lot of the younger players throughout their career. I questioned what veteran players who have recently been added might think of John Schneider, right? Does what he says or do his decisions resonate with veteran players who have had success on other teams, right? Does he resonate with a Springer? Does he resonate with a Chapman, Varsho, so on and so forth? And so this, again, speculative assumptions on my part, suggests that maybe he doesn't resonate with some of them, because to publicly tell off your manager on camera, really, that's a big deal. That really is a big deal. So it does make me wonder what might be going on behind the scenes. The flip side to all of this is that we saw yesterday and today John Schneider issue the intentional walks to Ohtani. So was that because of what Chapman said? Did other players, it makes you wonder, because if you want to show, hey, you don't tell me how to manage my team, I know what I'm doing here, thank you very much. It's just the whole dynamic of it is extremely interesting to me.
What stood out to me too is that everyone was like, it worked, they are walking Ohtani, but also all I could think is, what completely different scenarios than Kevin Gausman first inning, nobody on base. Like,
right.
Yeah, you could, obviously you walk Ohtani when there's somebody on second, of course.
Yeah.
Remember that series earlier with the Yankees where Judge pretty much won it single-handedly by hitting like 4 or 5 home runs? Like, we never were bringing it up in that case, right? Like, where was the walk Judge, walk Judge, right? No, we let him absolutely obliterate us, and that conversation was never brought up. But now it's like, it just seems out of nowhere. Like that, there were times over the course of the year that you could have walked their best hitter, but that situation, just like you said, just doesn't lead off. First inning, nobody on base, best pitcher you've got. That's the situation to pitch to him, if ever, right? So I don't know. And when you sit back, like, how does somebody not say that to Chapman? Like, okay, Chapman, you think you're really brilliant in this moment, you're chewing him out. What was the situation, and why would you think that was the time? Like, where's the person who says you're being an idiot right now? And you figured that conversation would have happened, especially how it blew up over Twitter. And you come out of the game that you've won, and you find out the number one story is your third baseman is chewing out your manager.
Maybe that's what Don Mattingly is for.
Maybe, yeah. That's a really good point.
It wasn't like it was some rookie either. That's the other thing. Matt Chapman's been around 10 years.
He knew what he was doing.
Yeah, he knew what he was doing,
And I don't think it was heat of the moment. It wasn't heat of the moment, right? Like, it wasn't, I'm so competitive and the adrenaline is pumping so hard that I just lose myself in the moment. Because you're right,
7 minutes into the game.
he could have just sided up to John Schneider at the railing and said, hey buddy, John, what are we doing here, man? Like, let's think about this next at bat, right? Versus what actually transpired.
Yeah, and if you want to be so critical of the situation, why didn't you call timeout and address it in the moment? If that was your thought process, you could have let your manager know, hey, why don't we just, you put up 4 fingers, you look at him and you go, huh, maybe? No, okay. It's like you had your moment to express that thought, and no, you didn't do it. And then afterward, you use hindsight. Like, what if there was a strikeout there? What if is he going to come in and he's not going to say the same thing if that was a strikeout? If that situation played out that a home run happened, and now I know everything and I have hindsight on my side. That just it seems kind of ridiculous.
The whole thing reminded me a bit of last year. Remember that clip of Tony La Russa, the guy from the stands yelling like, "Run, hey, run angle," and then La Russa throw, kind of felt like that where once Chapman yelled at Schneider's like, "Oh yeah, good idea." And that's the part I don't like about him going ahead and just like, what are you asleep at the wheel here, Tony? I mean, John.
Well, I think this will transition nicely into temperature check on John Schneider and just how everyone's feeling about it. So I'm going to start here with the fact that my topic was originally going to be, before today's game, was originally going to be a tip of the hat to John Schneider, because I have liked some of the things he did in the first 2 games of that series against the Angels. The one that stood out to me was when Alec Manoa injured Taylor Ward and hit him in the face. I mean, he could have just let him pitch to the next hitter, and he didn't. And I think it was so important to get Manoa out of that game at that point. Manoa was completely rattled. It was just an ugly scenario, and you only thoughts and all that good stuff. Hopefully he's fine and that Taylor Ward is back as soon as possible. But I did really think that was a really big move. And then, of course, today happened, and now I could pick them apart for so many different things, which is manager 101 when you're a fan, right? Like there were people when I was lucky enough to be at Dodger Stadium for the LA Toronto series, and there were sections of the fan base that were literally chanting "Fire Dave Roberts," and I was just like, so everyone hates their manager. Like, like if you're gonna, so it's just, but I am curious now that we are a full half a season in, and I think it's pretty close to a full year since John Schneider has been the manager of this Toronto Blue Jays organization. Joel, we'll start with you. Where are you at on your impressions as John manager, as a manager? And more importantly, have you felt like maybe there has been improvement as he has carried on with his tenure, or do you see a pattern of him making similar mistakes over and over?
The obvious mistakes of like the going out multiple times and not understanding that you've gone out multiple times and you have to change Manoa, and that incredibly embarrassing.
I mean, that you are bringing up the biggest mistake of his.
Big chunk of your offense with Kirk being a 660 OPS guy for 4 months of the season, Varsho, like all of these, that's not on him to magically change these guys and get them firing the way they should be at the plate. So I don't blame him for that. But to me, the fact that you're in this position where you're 12 games over 500 at this point, despite the fact that the offense is stuttering, is kind of a positive. So I feel like despite the fact that the offense has been clicking, you've still put yourself in a position to get into the playoffs and hopefully succeed and put yourself in a position to win a World Series. So, I can't, there are manager, I feel like you can make some moves with your management at this point because the offense just hasn't come around. It's gone from like, oh, it's just the first 2 months to, oh, the slumping is last. Now it's the entire season seems to be the slump. So, but the fact that we're still in it, I think is a positive element that your manager has kept you in it to this point in the season, with guys taking drastic step backs and home runs, RBIs, hitting, and all those aspects. So the fact that we're competitive, when you look at those, I think if you look at the offensive numbers and you say that to me, as opposed to saying, hey, we're at this point in the season with this record, we're 4.5 games back. I think if you showed me the lineup and what they're producing offensively, I'd be like, there's no way in hell we're in that position. There's no way in hell that we're 4 games back and 13 games over 500. So the fact that we are, I have to give them some credit, right? There has to be a little bit of credit given to him. So I'd say that my temperature on him is, what, 10 is bad, 0 is good. What I'm at about a 6.
Okay.
I'm okay.
Jen, where are you at when you look at John Schneider? What do you like? What does he do well? And where are you concerned?
So first of all, some credit where credit is due for going to George Springer and saying, I know you've been hitting leadoff for years, not anymore. Right. And for actually changing up the lineup, which is something that we've been saying for several weeks now should happen.
That was probably a bigger deal than people are giving it credit for, right, Jen? Like, there's a reason it took this long.
Because that conversation with Springer would have preceded actually putting up that lineup, right? And so we have to give credit for him actually doing that. I wasn't certain that we would see that actually happen this season. So there's that. Some very baffling decisions with bullpen use, pulling Pearson after 1 inning yesterday when he probably could have gone 2, and then that resulting in Garcia having to pitch 3 days in a row, and we saw what that led to. Like just, and I know that there's a bit of hindsight there, except for the fact that, as soon as Garcia came out, people were already saying, "Oh God, 3 days in a row, uh-oh," and that was before anything actually transpired. So, yeah, I like Joel. I'm somewhere in the middle on how I feel about him. I think that he's done a really decent job, but I don't think he's done a great job. I think that there have been some really glaring errors that I hope he continues to learn from. And by the time the playoffs roll around.
That's a great point. And that's where I'm at with John Schneider, is that it kills me to see him make mistakes that he's already made, where you're like, wait, I'll let you get away with it once or twice, but we're playing baseball here. 3 strikes, like, enough, buddy. Chris, when you just look at John Schneider's body of work, where are you at? And you can feel free to use Joel's very elaborate 0 to 10 scale if you want.
Yeah, I mean, going back to the same kind of points we've already talked about, when I step back and look at it in the big picture, it's hard to say, complain too much. He's going to be learning, especially as a new manager. He's going to make some mistakes, and he's going to, be learning on the job a bit, which there's pros and cons to having a new manager, relatively inexperienced manager. But to me, it comes back to my concern is the respect factor. And there's been other moments this year where I felt like I questioned whether some of the veterans or some of the other guys in the clubhouse were fully bought into following his leadership. So I like him. I think he's done a good job overall when you step back and look at it. But I think what happens down the stretch here and into the playoffs will be important, not only for Ross Atkinson's future in this organization, but I think also for John Schneider's too, because this is a team that's just built to win right now.
What does it take, in your opinion, Chris? What does it take for John Schneider and Ross Atkins to be safe? Division series is, if they just get to the division series, is that enough?
No, I don't think so. Well, sorry. Yeah, I was thinking. I don't know. That's a great question. Like, I mean, I'm I think back to, for some reason, the example that pops into my head is Dwayne Casey getting fired after winning Coach of the Year of the Raptors, and then them winning the NBA championship the following season. And so to me, it's just, what kind of note does the season end on? I think it's more like, if we have another heartbreaking end like we saw in Seattle last year, then I think there's like no alternative but to just, maybe, I don't want to say clean house, but make some significant changes. But if you just get straight up beat by a better team, I think it hurts less than beating yourselves. And I think for Schneider in particular, I think it'll be important to see, do we get beat by a better team, or do we get beat by making boneheaded mistakes and discipline issues and things like that? Because I think that's still a problem with this team throughout this year is discipline moments, especially with base running and things like that. And that's kind of what felt like the ultimate downfall in that series last year in the playoffs.
Jen, do you have a checklist? Is there a mark you want to see the water hit? Or is it kind of situational? Like, I really do feel like this team is kind of, if they don't go to the ALCS, I'm going to be incredibly, incredibly disappointed, and I do see it as a failure. However, I mean, in a situation like Chris was kind of mentioning, right, where if they go to Game 5 of the division series and they're up against the Tampa Bay Rays and they lose an extra innings or something like that, it's pretty hard to not consider that a kind of a win. But do you have that benchmark?
Trying to not make comparisons to past seasons here, okay? Because if you look at, let's say, last year and the embarrassing fashion in which they got bounced from the wild card, right? And the season before missing the playoffs by 1 game. You could then claim that just an appearance in the ALDS is a win, right? By that standard.
Sure.
I don't want to try to judge by that standard, because they should not have been bounced from that wild card playoff, right? That was I can't even. And so I absolutely think they need to make the ALDS. Frankly, I think they need to win the ALDS. Like, I think they need to get to that championship series. I really do. If they lose in the ALDS, but it's a really good competitive series where you don't see, some of the errors, some of the lapses in judgment that have been made, on this season so far, then maybe that's classified as a win.
Speaking of the American League Championship Series, we'll get into the trade deadline a little bit, but the New York Mets just yesterday moved Max Scherzer to the Texas Rangers. I know Joel mentioned John Montgomery was just traded there as well from the St. Louis Cardinals. The Rangers starting pitching is looking very, very good, considering Jacob deGrom is on the IL, right? Who saw that coming? I mean, obviously everyone. So it's impressive that they have managed to bolster that rotation enough to get them to this deadline and be able to kind of go out there and beef it up a little bit. So let's start with the New York Mets, because it is really interesting what Steve Cohen is doing, in that he has pretty much just accepted the fact that he blew a bunch of money for no good reason. And now he's using that money. He's eating it in a lot of cases. I mean, look at Scherzer, right? He's literally footing half the bill for Max Scherzer's remaining salary. And on top of that, seems like he's going to do the same for Justin Verlander and some of these other guys on this New York Mets team. But to be able to eat that money and get the highest level of prospects back and really kind of reinvigorate that farm system of the New York Mets is really impressive. Chris, despite the fact that this is obviously economically the least, there's I'll just let you take over here. You know what I'm saying. It's not there is a word for I'm trying to get, but you get what I'm
Savvy. It's
saying.
not savvy.
It's not the most savvy way to build your farm system up, but I guess it's better than just sticking with the contracts.
You know what? It shows that he's serious about winning, and money's all relative. I mean, to Steve Cohen, what's $100 million? And like, that sounds like a ludicrous statement to say, but to a man like that, $100 million, oh, like I lose that in my shorts and when I go to the gym, I don't know. And so like, he made a mistake, and I give him full credit. I mean, one of the biggest criticisms of Rodgers over the years has been that they don't spend to their capability. And so as a Mets fan, even though the season has been beyond frustrating, if I'm watching my manager go get a legitimate prospect, or my owner go get a legitimate prospect like Acuna because he sent a pile of cash that was in his own vault, I love the man. I think it's fantastic. And I would, love to see. I don't hope we're not in a situation where we're doing anything like that as Blue Jays fans, but if you have the power to flex your muscles financially, as he did this offseason and he's doing again now, shows the man wants to win. And I think that's great.
Efficient is the word I was after, but very well put, Chris. My concern, and Jen, I will throw it to you here on what your thoughts are on it, but is it possible that this billionaire just literally spends and spends and spends, and maybe he actually does get a World Series out of it at some point? But let's look 10 years down the road. Is it possible that he gets bored and sells the team, and then the New York Mets are literally just the absolute worst for a decade because of it?
I mean, if anything is possible.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, first of all, I can't imagine having that kind of money, right? To literally spend on just your like essentially a fantasy team for yourself. It's like you're playing fantasy baseball with millions. And that to me is insane. I can't even fathom how one person can actually do that, bankroll that on their own. So it's really difficult to even conceive of what is going on there. He obviously wants to win. And maybe if he ever does get that World Series, right? Like maybe that is when he gets bored and says, I've done it. I did it. Here we go. I don't need to do this anymore. Now I'm on to the next bucket list item. Like I have absolutely no idea how the mind of a billionaire, particularly one like him, works. And it's interesting because on the one hand, you look at this and you say, obviously, throwing money around does not guarantee you wins. It does not guarantee that you are going to field a baseball team that is going to get you to the promised land. But like Chris said, I want my owner to spend money.
Yeah.
Right? I wouldn't want people to take a look at this and say, oh, well, that just right there proves that teams shouldn't spend all this money acquiring these players because it doesn't work. I absolutely do want my ownership or the ownership of the team to spend to the max, whatever their max is.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely.
And, you got, we've talked about this before, but the difference between a private citizen bankrolling a team versus corporate ownership who absolutely has the finances, but has so many other people to answer to, right? There is a tremendous difference, whether the fan base likes it or not. It is not equivalent.
Joel, could you ever imagine Rodgers going out and spending $40 million a year on a 40-year-old for 2 years, and then halfway through the first year being like, whoopsie, no big deal.
And then paying what, 30 million of it?
Yeah.
38, I think.
Yeah, it was 38 million they're paying.
That is just a concept of money that I will never have in my life. It's just wow. It's a wild situation for sure. And but
like that would sink the Pirates. Like literally a contract like that by the Pirates that didn't work out, they'd be talking about it 10 years from now, right? Kind of like when they traded Chris Archer. Yeah. Or acquired him, I should say. Yeah.
On the other hand, I mean, it was a less expensive mistake than maybe Carlos Correa could have been. And then
Yeah. Oh. Yeah, to think that people there was 12 years connected to Correa at the beginning of the year, which
Yeah.
is that would have been, oh my God. Wow. And all those shortstops, that to go on to that point, pretty much every single shortstop that has been signed for big money is absolutely crapping the bed. Trey Turner is World Baseball Classic, the greatest baseball player you've ever seen, now can't hit a ball for the entire season. So yeah, that's those investments. Like, don't get me wrong, I want to be the team that throws $300 million at a franchise player.
Yeah,
But
it's a
when
scary endeavor. Like,
yeah,
it's a lot
it
of risk.
really,
It's got to be the right guy.
That's a really great point, because as soon as that money gets into your bank account, was your goal to be a really great baseball player, or to be a third of a billionaire? Because like a third of a billionaire is going to create a lot of laziness in my life. I know if I have $340 million coming to me, I've reached the top of my mountain. I don't have to work hard anymore. And
It's such a
that's
good
probably
point,
how
because you know what I can't stop thinking about is Manny Machado. All I can think is, like, what would his numbers look like this season if he hadn't been given that massive extension?
If he was a pending free agent, yeah.
Right? If he was a pending free agent, the top third base free agent in baseball, would he still suck this year? Which I'm really overblowing it, because Manny Machado's not having a terrible year. It's kind of like when Vladdy slumps, right? He's still above average, but everyone is used to the numbers he normally puts up. But I just, like, Matt Chapman could still get $200 million, and he's not does anyone here think Matt Chapman's a $200 million 8 to 10 year guy?
No.
But this brings up a tweet that somebody sent me this morning, and they asked why. I'm sort of paraphrasing here, but like, why has it become acceptable, from the media that covers the Blue Jays, and many of whom are employed by Rogers, why has it become an acceptable take that the Blue Jays are simply not signing Matt Chapman?
Yeah.
Like, in other words, why would you not sort of push back on that and say, well, why wouldn't you be up there in terms of the offer made to him? Now, how far do you want to push that envelope, right? How much money do you think he's actually worth? How do you think he's going to age? Blah, 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 blah. But it is an interesting question, right? Like, why is everybody just sort of accepting the fact that they're not going to sign him because he's going to be too expensive?
It blows me away, because there's still, you read the comments, like, and I shouldn't read the comments on our YouTube stuff, but I do, because I like to try and interact.
I do too.
and respond. Like, I do try to. I know for the most part it's a pretty good community, but there's lots of people who feel differently sometimes, and like, you get some pretty negative stuff, and I just wonder, when it comes to Matt Chapman, like, people still say Rogers is cheap. And I just don't feel like that statement holds any water anymore. Like, don't get me wrong, there was a period when Rogers was cheap, but that is not this year, right? No. They're the 6th highest spending team in Major League Baseball. They obviously are going to go in at the trade deadline. We already talked about that ad nauseum. They're going to do it, which means they're going to bump themselves up into that next luxury tax. So they're going to be paying the double whammy. Like, it makes no sense to act like this is a poverty franchise. They absolutely could go out and sign Matt Chapman. And Joel, I know you and I text all the time and have talked about this pending hole at third base. Outside of Matt Chapman, there are really not a lot of options. And I'm talking internally, I'm talking free agency. What direction would you want to see this organization go about to fill that third base hole come 2024?
Yeah, so we were in the situation where a month ago we were talking about dealing Chapman because of the situation of, like, can you just let him walk, right? Like, is it an opportunity to try to fill that hole now? And because if you're 100% certain that he's not going to sign, and try to bring on somebody aboard to fill that hole. But like, yeah, I think with all the money spending for the team, we're the 6th highest spending team. What's the focus has been a lot of veteran spending,
Mhm.
a lot of spending on 32 and up, so there's a lot of money that's allocated to age and the years where decline starts to kick in, right? And I feel like if we're going to be this big money spending team that's sixth in payroll, I feel like the shift needs to become more towards 20 to 30 than 30 to 40. And, that's the ability to lock up players using arbitration, using those rookie years. And that comes with a lot of faith, you have to know your scouting, you have to know your player development, you have to know how these players are going to be able to pan out. But I really feel like when it comes to how we spend that sixth highest rated payroll in all of baseball, that I really want it to be towards more 26 to 32 than 32 to 40, right?
Mhm.
And yeah, so with Chapman and filling that hole, right? Like nobody is confident that Arelvis is going to step in next year and be able to take that spot.
Oh no,
Addison Barger
I think it's
is like,
far closer to Barger or even David
yeah,
Schneider than
yeah.
Elvis. Yeah.
So, that might be a situation where you do take a big step back, but then if you're going to rely on that youth to kind of fill that hole, it's a situation where you give them 2 months, and then if it's not, that hole isn't filled, you have to go fill it on the trade market. And yeah, it's tough because not only is it a surefire defensive player who gives you Gold Glove caliber defense, but it's a guy who is top 5 in your lineup, and that means a lot more. A guy who hits top 5 in this lineup isn't the same thing that it was 2 years ago, 3 years ago, when you had depth to fill that spot when it walks away. So, he is one of our best hitters. He's 810 OPS right now. Like, it's not, it's a lot of swing and miss. It's the last 10-15 games have been a lot better than that big gap of failure that he had,
Mhm.
kind of coming off of that amazing start he had. But at the same point, it's just like, it is going to be a big hole. We saw what it was when it was Kevin Biggio there.
I was just
and
going to say that it is so easy to forget how important the hot corner is when you don't need to constantly worry about the guy playing third. And that has been the case with Matt Chapman since he was acquired. I mean, the dude has been a vacuum at third. I mean, think about the fact that this year is maybe his worst defensive year, metric wise. End of sentence. And he's been great.
Yeah.
Like at no point am I like, oh, another error from Chappie. Like, yeah, he's had a few this year, but he's still a stalwart third baseman. Jen, would you rather see Matt Chapman than any of the other options?
Right now, yes. Yeah.
Forget money.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
No, I can forget money because
yeah.
not mine, but yeah, I mean, compared to what the other options currently are, yes, I would prefer to see Matt Chapman. I think that what you just said, what he provides defensively, I think that his defense makes Bo's defense better as well.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think on that side of the diamond. So I think the improvements there, it's sort of, it almost is paying for itself at that point. Would I like him to produce more at the plate? Absolutely. Can I predict how he's going to age? Absolutely not.
Yeah.
So these are all things that obviously are going to have to be taken into consideration, but I would like to not just automatically dismiss the idea of the Blue Jays being in on him in free agency, right? And I think we have just simply dismissed it because we don't think ownership will pay whatever the asking cost is.
I mean, one thing to keep in mind is there's money coming off the books next year. It's not like everyone on this team is under contract. I mean, Hyun-Jin Ryu was taking up a pretty good portion of the payroll. I mean, he was making $20 million a year, and that is no longer the case come 2024.
Well, is there a possibility that you throw him a bigger short-term deal with opt-outs? It's like, is that a possibility that you throw 90 million over 3, 100 over 3, and you got an opt-out after year 1? It's I say that because if you don't feel like you're going to be locking up Vladdy and Bo, if you're seeing them walk out the door, then don't you secure Chapman to the end of those when those contracts leave, pretty much match them together. I know that's difficult because Chapman wants probably 6 or 7 years, but I don't know. Is that a possible outcome that you overpay on a short term, give him an opt out after the first or second year if he goes off and puts 40 up and wants to sign somewhere else next year? At least you've got like one or kind of the way they approached Correa originally with Minnesota, not the second time, but that first, lots of money, short term opt outs whenever you want them, just to guarantee
Bridge the
next
gap.
year.
Yeah.
Just to guarantee next year, right?
Yeah.
I don't see it happening, but
Yeah, I don't either, because I mean Matt Chapman's 29 years old. This is his chance to cash in.
Yeah.
And to me, the most important thing is the Yankees' third base has been a black hole for a while, and there's no way that the Yankees wouldn't just offer him a 7-year deal or something. But
Speaking of New
I
York
think,
teams with money that need a third baseman,
right.
I mean, the Mets could possibly be involved as well.
yeah, they could potentially be. The thing that I find, there's a couple points I want to make about Chapman before we move on. Is one, we've ranted and raved most of the season about how great the pitching staff has been, whether it's starting pitching outside of Manoa or this bullpen that's just gotten even better. They're not this good without Matt Chapman and Dalton Varsho and Kevin Kiermaier.
Great point.
Like, just straight up, the defense has made the pitching staff way better. And I think we wrote off the idea of re-signing Chapman too early, because when he was in April, he was the American League Player of the Month. He looked like he was headed for a 7-year, $25 million a year kind of deal. Now, when I look at him, I was thinking about today, we're pretty much at the 2/3 spot, like pole of the season, right? So you can, if you want
where
to,
he always is.
well, and so like I look at it, and he's got 14 home runs and 44 RBI. So if you just do a very crude math, we're looking at a guy that's got 21, 22 home runs, 70 RBI. I'll be curious to see what his market's like, because he does provide a ton of value. Obviously, that defense is important. He's a huge WAR. He's got great numbers in the WAR department, all that kind of things. But when you step back, outside of what he's produced in doubles this season, he's kind of, I think he, in a perfect world to me, he's not a top 5 hitter for this team or for any contender. Like if you can slot him into 6th or 7th, and he can provide, and he can be that kind of guy that can, have an extra 20, 25 home runs a year. That's a perfect world. And that's where we were hoping we would be if Kirk was the same kind of hitter that he was in the first half of last season, and that kind of thing. If Varsho had hit the way that we thought he would when he got here. But Chapman, I feel like he's been forced into a role on the offense that is not more than he's capable of, but more than ideally that you'd ask from him. I don't know, that's the way I put it anyway.
Okay, what we're going to do now is go to topics. The show might be a little shorter than normal. No big deal here. We'll start with you, Joel, as I know you've got to get out of here in the next 5 minutes. But what did you have for us today, my dude?
I think my topic was somewhat touched on earlier, but I can do a backup one. I think my point now, especially with the trades that we made with the bullpen and everything, I feel like instead of have we put ourselves in a position where we can do a bullpen game, like where a bullpen game is a legitimate option now because we have so much depth out of the pen? Is the team potentially looking at it like, we don't, I always thought that there was going to be another starter added to this team at the deadline just because of the inconsistency of Ryu coming back. But are we now in a position where instead of that, you feel confident on a bullpen game, especially if Pearson comes back healthy and is pitching the way he was for the first 3 months of the season, Romano comes back healthy, and you've got that entire list of bullpen arms that you mentioned, Scott? Is that a situation where there's going to be a really, really quick trigger on starting pitching, and you're going to see, especially when it comes to postseason time, where you'll be confident running out Barrios and Gosman, but do you go to a potential bullpen game 3, game 4 of a series, where you're kind of running out an opener? You're running out Trevor Richards for 2 innings to start a game, and then bullpenning it the rest of the way because it is so stacked at this point.
I will jump in here. I personally, I would far rather see them have a much shorter leash on a guy like Yusei Kikuchi than go with the opener route and go with the full bullpen day. But I do think this gives them a lot of leeway for making options like that, right? First inning, and Yusei Kikuchi is just doesn't have it. You know, we watched this team give probably more leeway to Alec Manoa in that first game of the wild card than they should have. And then we watched them maybe not get to the bullpen fast enough in game 2 when the whole thing collapsed. And I think just having such a strong pen is going to allow John Schneider to have a shorter leash, to make these moves rather than need to just roll the dice that his starter can get him deeper into the game. That's personally where I'm at. I can't see them actually going like a traditional bullpen route of starting with Trevor Richards and going from there. But I mean, it is a possibility, and they've got the horses to do it. It could be an interesting strategy.
I'd be surprised if they, like, I'd be, you know, I agree with you. I think they certainly could, given the personnel that they have. But right now, they're kind of looking at a 6-man rotation scenario with Ryu coming back, and so I think, I think 2 starts are really important, and Ryu's next couple of starts are really important to see, you know, where they both fit into the picture. Whether the Blue Jays are going to trust Ryu to be a consistent guy in the, you know, in that 5-man rotation if they reduce it, whether they feel that Manoa is going to be a guy that can help them the rest of the year, or if it's, you know, if they, right, I could see I guess when I looked at yesterday's game and the way that Manoa came out, I just thought to myself, his next start's going to be really important to stay on the roster. And that sounds extreme, but there's quite a roster pinch right now, and if they keep bringing guys in, it's only going to get tighter. And if you got Ryu back and you got Kikuchi pitching well and the other 3 veterans at the top, who knows?
Jen, bullpen days, can you see it?
I think I agree where it would just be a quicker hook on certain pitchers rather than planning a bullpen day from the outset, because right now they do have 6 starters on the roster.
Mm-hmm.
And if they're rolling with 6 starters, you're probably not putting a bullpen day in there anywhere, right? And these next 17 games, and this is bleeding into my topic because I did want to talk specifically about Alec Manoa, but we'll get there. You know, the next 17 games in 17 days, I do think is quite critical to see whether or not you do have a 6-man rotation. Or do you really only have a 5-man rotation? Or do you really only have a 4-man rotation?
Mm-hmm.
What do you really have here? And the unfortunate part with the timing of Ryu's return is that it's after the deadline. Right? So that's the unfortunate part. And I know that they've said all the right things about his bullpen session the other day and that they really like what they're seeing from him. But we really have absolutely no idea what he's going to look like out on that mound. And to be fair, and I'll get to Manoa a bit later, but we really don't know what Manoa is going to look like when he takes that mound. And Kikuchi, I have more faith in Kikuchi than in the other 2 that I just mentioned.
As we all should.
And he's absolutely earned it.
Yeah.
But at times is still that wild card out there, right? And so, you know, I am very interested. Like, we've already identified the fact that they need to get somebody who will hit left-handed pitching. Do they add another pitcher at the deadline? Or, you know, because what they say publicly is different from what they say internally.
That's very true.
I'm very curious what their temperature check actually is on Manoa and Ryu.
This transitions perfectly into my topic, so I'm just going to jump in here because I'm excited about Hyun-Jin Ryu. And I know, listen, before I even get into this, I do want to state I am very aware we should all temper our expectations for Ryu's return. This is a 35-year-old.
Absolutely not.
Who, right?
He's the new ace. I refuse to hear otherwise. He's our new ace.
He hasn't pitched since June of last year. He's coming off a Tommy John surgery. But I'm excited. I like Ryu. I liked him right from the offset when they signed him. I thought he was incredible with the Dodgers. This is a dude who has never pitched off a velo, has always been about mixing his pitches and dropping in the breaking ball. And all the talk is that his changeup looks about as good as it's ever looked. I mean, again, who knows? It's all lip service. We don't really know. But I can actually see Ryu coming in here and maybe even making a start in the playoffs. And I know that sounds like I'm jumping off the deep end here, but I really am excited to see what this dude can bring. He's got the experience. He's got the age. He's got the mindset. He's a dude who's cool under pressure. I'm excited to see what he brings, and I'm curious what everyone here feels about Ryu and his return. Joel, do you want to start?
Sure. Yeah. I'm excited. I'm a little wary because of the drop off after the foreign substance, but at the same time, I'm really like, I look at him physically, and that looks like the most physically impressive Hyun-Jin Ryu I've ever seen.
Agreed.
So
He's dropped 30 pounds actually since last year.
It doesn't even look like him. Doesn't look like the player that he's been for the last 10 years. So, and I feel like that's a guy who I feel like he still wants to play. Like he's not retiring. He's not going to go back to Korea. I don't
worked
think
his ass off to get back to this fast.
Yeah.
So I feel like he's trying. He is in his mindset going to use the final end of the season as a, kind of a demonstration of his abilities, and that he wants to play next year and jack up his value for whoever wants to sign him in the offseason. So he has everything to play for, not just for the team, but for personally, and signing another, consistent, pretty solid contract after the season's over. So he has everything to play for when it comes to the final, however much the season is. So I think there's a good reason to have pretty solid expectations. It's tough when you don't have the velocity to blow guys away. So you have to be so on point with every single pitch that you throw. But, if there's one guy who can come back after that amount of, I'm much more excited for a guy who has already reached his velo peak, his velo expectations coming off of Tommy John, like 91. He's throwing the fastball 91. He's throwing the cutter 90, 91. You're like, that's him. That's what he's always been. It's not like you're getting news that the fastball's at 90, 91 when it should be at 95. It's like, so I feel like that plays also a little bit better than a guy who's needs maybe a season to get his fastball back up to where it should be, right?
And there's plenty of examples of pitchers that kind of match up the ilk of Hyun-Jin Ryu, right? Like if you look at like a Charlie Morton, right? Just came back after injury later in his career and has been lights out. Chris, where are you at on Ryu, and what do you consider the worst case and best case scenario for him?
I mean, worst case, he gets banged around in a couple of starts and gets DFA'd. I think that's like a nightmare scenario for him. I don't expect that to happen.
Yeah.
Best case scenario, I think you said, I could see a scenario where him and Kikuchi and Manoa, with Kikuchi being the obvious clubhouse leader, are competing to be a Game 4 starter in the playoffs.
Yeah.
And there's enough time left in the season that if he pitches well enough, he could maybe earn that kind of role. I do like the idea of having a kind of a soft tossing lefty. You look at a team like the Orioles with all the left-handed hitters that they've got. There's enough left-handed hitting on the good teams, the Yordan Alvarez for the Astros and Kyle Tucker.
Tampa.
Tampa has got a whole bunch. There's enough that I like the idea of having another lefty and a guy with a different look. And going back to what Joel was talking about earlier, like I'd love a scenario where we see Ryu, pitch 4-5 innings in a game, and then Nate Pearson comes out and throws 100, and then Trevor Richards comes out and throws 80 mile an hour changeup, and then
Jordan Hicks comes out and
throw. Yeah, exactly. Like it's just kind of like doing the lefty righty matchup down the lineup or something. But
bringing Eric Swanson and his splitter and call it a day.
Yeah, absolutely. But, I think he's got a chance to win a role, and I think a lot of Blue Jays fans are discounting how big of it's almost like an extra a get at the deadline. Like I saw an article earlier today that was talking about like, what about Steven Matz as a swing man? And I'm like, man, like,
is that where we're at? Yeah.
Right. Like even if Ryu was a swing man, like that's potentially and I don't think he's going to fill that role, but even if that's what it was, it's like, he's still a veteran that has won and has playoff experience. And is respected in the clubhouse. And so to me, it's all good that if he comes back, even if he's just a veteran leader.
And sometimes sports stories just line up beautifully like that. We all watched it happen in 2015 when Marcus Stroman came back early and completely and totally dominated for them in the playoffs.
Totally.
And I'm not saying that could be the height that Ryu hits, but I think he could really contribute. Jen, are you on board with the fact that Ryu's probably going to take a substantial amount of starts for the rest of the year? Where do you think they fit him in? Yeah.
Absolutely. I'm really curious to see, how he looks, and he's facing the Orioles right off the bat, so it'll be really, really interesting to see how he looks out there. I think you guys have all made really good points, similar things to what I was thinking, which is that he is a veteran and he doesn't get rattled, and he's been there and he's done that. And, I don't think he's going to in any way, look diminished in any of this. I think, the effort that he's put in, like 30 pounds in a year is significant, that is significant.
Yeah.
That is a significant weight loss and requires quite a bit of dedication and hard work. And so, as you said, like, he is extremely motivated. He wants to be out there. He wants to compete. He wants to secure himself his next contract. And all of that gives me reason to expect good things from him. And if you do look at the 6 guys that they have in that rotation, without even seeing Ryu take the mound, if I had to predicting the future, it would be Manoa who's the odd man out.
Feel the same way.
Yeah, I would agree.
Okay, Jen, speaking of Manoa.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to talk about him a little bit, just because we didn't really talk about him when talking about the series. Obviously yesterday, that one fastball that really got away from him, and I was there for that, and I was sitting pretty close. That was scary. I'm just going to say that, and I really do, hope he's okay and returns really, really soon. But Alec Manoa was shaky leading up to that pitch. He really wasn't hitting his spots. He had already hit Shohei Ohtani. What is our confidence level in Alec Manoa, and do we feel that they brought him back too soon?
Personally,
I do.
I have, and I mean this
respectfully.
Respectfully. No, I have zero confidence, like literally 0%. There is zero confidence in Alec Manoa right now for me. I really do think he's the odd man out. I do think that they rushed him back a little bit, but they did so to see what he had, I think. And I think that was more of a favor to Manoa than maybe some are letting on. I think that they have had the lines of communication open with him. And maybe this is just a selfish organizational move, and they're just, hurting a young man's career. But I don't think it's that simple. I just think that he was such a huge member of this core in 2022 and such a huge contributor that they almost owed it to him to see what he can do in this point. And the fact that they're even still sending him out, like, he wasn't terrible yesterday. In fact, the first 4 innings were pretty decent. But one thing that was very apparent is when he hit a wall, and it was fast, right? Like, he hit Ohtani, he gave up a walk. It was just like one thing. And then next thing you know, he's being pulled after blowing up a dude's face. Like, yeah, not a lot of confidence.
He did give up 2 very long, loud fly balls that I think would have been out if the roof had been open when those balls were hit.
See, I was driving to a gig, so I was listening on the radio. So I don't have the same. I like hearing that. I meant to ask you guys even like how he actually looked, because on the radio it was just like, oh, deep fly ball. And I was like, oh, good. No problem.
Yeah. The one with the bases loaded, depending on with that roof being open, you never know. Right. I think the line and on me watching at the game and not seeing it on TV also is more challenging because I'm not seeing the strike zone box. Right. So I'm not really seeing, all of that piece of it. But he does clearly, once he's rattled, he's very rattled. And once he, can't find the strike zone, he really can't find the strike zone. And I will just go ahead and say it. I absolutely think they brought him back too soon.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's, short term wanting to see what he looks like versus the long game, which is his career.
Mm-hmm.
I genuinely, I thought it at the time. I genuinely think it was a mistake to bring him back when they did. And the main reason why I think that is because half the problem does seem to be this confidence issue that he has developed, right? Where, like I said, I don't know that he is the most confident guy right from the beginning of the game anymore, right? Because I think you are pitching with a fair amount of tension on your shoulders at that point, wondering what version of yourself you're going to be that day, and then as soon as he gets rattled, it all absolutely falls apart. Now, hitting a guy in the face is going to rattle you, let's be honest.
Yeah.
Okay. So we'll let's be fair about that. But when confidence is an issue, rushing him back before that piece is intact, I just think they're screwing with his career. And I don't know that they're doing it with any malice. I'm sure they're not doing it with any malice.
No, yeah.
But I still think that it was the wrong decision for the long-term success of Alec Manoa.
It's kind of wild to think about if you were to just take every single team in Major League Baseball and strip away their number one starter from last year, which one of those teams would still be like the Blue Jays and right there in the thick of a playoff race? I don't think there's very many of them. I mean, it is actually really impressive what this starting staff has done without Alec Manoa. Chris, before we get to your topic, what were your thoughts on Alec Manoa and where he's at?
I feel when Manoa comes out to the mound, I feel like I did when I watched Kikuchi 2 months ago, where it was just like a wild card where you don't know what you're going to get on any given day. And I agree with a lot of what's been said. It's a confidence thing to me when I watch him. I mean, obviously he's had to work on some mechanics and tweak some things. He's got himself in a little bit better shape. All those things factor into it. But to me, it's a guy, when he's feeling good on the mound, then you can see the difference. And when he's not, and after after that kind of inning went bad on him yesterday, I'm glad that Schneider made a quick move. I absolutely think they brought him back too quickly. I felt the same way as you, Jen, when they did it at the time. I didn't understand, because it's a very drastic move to send him all the way back to the complex in Dunedin. To me, it was such a drastic thing to do, and then to just be like, well, maybe we kind of need you back. Come on, we could use an extra starter. It made no sense long term, and to me, there's two guys on this team that need a reset button so bad for 2024. It's Alec Manoa and Dalton Varsho. And I think both of them could be potential all-stars next year I think the talent is there for both of them to be that caliber of player, but 2023 just wasn't the year.
The point of their
Sorry.
The point of there being no rhyme or reason is really what rubs me the wrong way about this, because when you send a kid down to the Florida complex just to work on things in the lab, and then you let him perform in the Florida complex league and he gets shelled, and then you bring him up to AA for one start, and then you're like, and he's fixed. Yeah. It just felt disgenuine right from the start. And it felt like they were going through the motions for something that, like, I don't understand why they were going through the motions. Like do it, right? Like rebuild the kid.
Commit to it. Yeah.
When they originally sent him to the Florida complex, that suggested to me that they were in it for the long haul, right? That they were going to essentially rebuild this kid, the mechanics, the confidence, whatever they saw going on, the physique, whatever they saw as being a contributing factor, they were going to address all of it down there. And he wasn't coming back until he was this, rebuilt Alec Manoa 2.0, right? Let's go. And I genuinely thought we might not see him the rest of the season. That he was going to be, really taking his time. There was going to be no rush because of that long-term development piece. And then, to bring him back so quickly, well, we're done. I don't understand what the point of any of it really was then.
Joel, anything to add here?
Yeah, like my shock in it was that they didn't put themselves in a position when they sent down Manoa. To me, that's where you make a deal to bring in the guy. You put no expectations on Manoa for the rest of the year. Once you make that move, you can't put any expectations on him coming back. So you have to fill that spot. Magically, if he comes back a month later and you've got a guy that you can trust, hooray! But you can't put any expectations that will happen, right? So the fact that they didn't make a roster move to say, like, that would have been a statement. Be like, listen, you're going down, and here's the guy who's going to fill that hole for you until you're ready to take it back the proper way. And they didn't. So it became like you're going down to the bottom, but there was no plan. There was no, it was, you're here on this team, you're here on this team. It's like Vancouver is an exceptional ball club this year. You would think that he could sit down with a team that has got success and find a little bit of, like, have a team around you, not be rotated from organization to organization. Like, mini trades are happening to you, and you have to get used to all of these different factors of joining a new team and being run through different, like, 4 different leagues of baseball. And then the fact that, like, this is a guy who, when he's on his game, is still going to lead the league in hit by pitch. This is still a guy who's going to, he got to the point now where he's so inconsistent, he's dangerous. He's a dangerous option now. And for him to be coming out of a game after putting a guy down like that and having that in your head, and now that's swirling, that never needed to happen. He doesn't need to be sitting there right now with the thoughts of, like, oh, now I don't know if I can pitch inside, right. And that's a terror. That's just more things to be thrown onto his head, make him even more of a head case when that should have never been on the table in the first place. So yeah, it's not. Also, every single voice of the Blue Jays talked about the previous experience of watching your ace in Roy Halladay be completely reset at this point in his career, and having the time to give him what was it, 70 innings he pitched, something to that tune of 70, 80 innings to get yourself right. And just the fact that we had that in the team's history, we understood that process, and then it seems like we went with it. It seems like that's what we were going to do. And then 2 weeks later, nothing said that he was ready to come back, but he was back. And just baffles the mind that you may be affecting that kid's long-term career with really short-term decisions, when, as a general manager, you've got to be able to make a move to say, we're going to take the weight off your shoulders right now. Your team, you over the next 5 years means a hell of a lot to us than the next 6 weeks, 2 months. So,
and like, to me, like, the mistakes, I agree with you, just exactly what you said, Joel. But the other thing that bothers me is they screwed it up on the other end of the extreme too. Like, I feel like when we looked in spring training and they had show this video of Schneider inviting Manoa into the office, and like, you're our ace, you're our game one guy. And meanwhile, we have Cy Young Kevin Gausman just being like, all right, well, I guess he sucked in the playoffs last year, but screw me, I guess I'll be number 2. Not that he cares, I'm sure, but like, they gave Manoa, like, I don't want to say an undeserved sense of accomplishment, because it's not like he was great last year. He was a top 3 Cy Young finisher. But to me, giving a piece of humble pie and saying, you're going to learn from Gausman and maybe even Bassett or whatever going into the year and be the number 2 or 3 guy. And then to get instantly, it almost felt like more of a punishment to send him to Dunedin the way they handled it than it did like for his own good.
And Gosman is a guy who meets the expectations of the contract put upon him. So everything that you expect of that guy, he is doing. So why wouldn't he be the guy that you put in that position to say, you know, lead by example? So I agree with you, Chris.
I've said that repeatedly on this show.
Yeah,
Right.
you have to.
Alec Manoa, for me, I know he was their best pitcher last season. He still would not have gotten game one of that wild card series. I would have gone with the veteran, and he would not have been anointed, you know, the day one starter this season. I know it doesn't matter once the opening day is gone, but it is that little bit of that boost, right? Like, you know, it's like that unofficial anointment of who you, right? And I just simply wouldn't have done it for a guy who hasn't done it long enough. That's all. You know, I would have gone to my veteran, and he would have been the dude from the get-go. So yeah, I think all around the way that Alec Manoa has been handled by the front office is very, very baffling. And I really do hope he can find that reset button for next year. I mean, it would be great if he could do it mid-season, but I think maybe that ship has sailed at this point. You know, I think there really is too much going on in his head at this point, and yesterday it clearly wouldn't help that case. I genuinely hope he can find that reset button next year, and not for the sake of the team, for his own sake.
We will move on here to Chris's topic, but beforehand, I will just state that this is a kid who oozed confidence last year. Confidence was the least of his problems. And to watch a young man who obviously has completely lost it, if, and knocking on all the wood here, if this kid's career is long-term affected by this, that is one of the most unacceptable moves by this front office, and head should roll. We'll leave it at that. All right, Chris, lay it on me. What do you got for us today?
You know, it's probably a nice short topic, but I was curious how each of you would playoff start today. How do you line up your rotation, and who do you leave out of the bullpen picture? Because by my count, and granted, we got to have Romano come back, and we got to see what we have in Chad Green, but between Jordan Romano, Jordan Hicks, Eric Swanson, Tim Meza, Chad Green, Trevor Richards,
Jay
Garcia, Jay Jackson, Nate Pearson, and now Cabrera, we're looking at like 10 viable relievers. Can you carry 9 in the playoffs? I can't remember how they designate that, because you can, obviously you're not having 5 starters, but
yeah, you do have the 2 extra roster spots, I think. Yeah.
I get, maybe the better question is do you think, all right, who started in the playoff rotation, and then do you think that Nate Pearson still factors into this bullpen? Because of that list, he's the guy that's got options. So do you think that this Hicks injury could eventually push out Pearson? Hicks acquisition could push Pearson out of the picture for this year.
I really do. I think that that's exactly what it was for. Like the 2-inning fireballer is kind of Pearson's MO, is that he can maybe give you 2 and give you that serious heat. So to me, it was the short-term filling of Romano. As soon as he's back, Hicks becomes the guy that is pretty much in Pearson's spot, but a little bit more. I think you can trust more. So it's like an upgrade in that sense. And then I don't know if I'm bringing Manoa on this postseason roster. I don't know if he's on this team come October. So yeah, I think those are my 2 odd men out, would be Pearson and Manoa. And then like literally just tell Manoa right now that he is preparing for 2024 and that he needs to get his head right and everything. Like I'm almost to the point where you start his off season now and get him, you know, off social media, on a, like you get him on a health, like somebody to come in and change his diet, and you get him, you know, on the horse that he needs to be for 2024. And because the failure of his inability to come back the way that we needed to, you have to make that decision that you should have made fully a month ago. Now you have to just go with it, send him down, let him enjoy some of Vancouver's success. They'll take a playoff run. You know, he could be on that team. He could find success in the postseason this year, just probably not for the Blue Jays.
Yeah, I agree with that. I don't think you're putting him out there in the playoffs. I really truly don't. I think the only benefits right now to him, you know, as far as development goes, being on this roster is his relationship with Ryu. And Ryu coming back and whatever mentorship there is there. But, you know, Ryu's got his own things, his own work to do still, right? So, you know, Manoa absolutely is out of that playoff picture as we sit today. And I don't think that that's going to change come the playoffs. You know, I think you're going with Gausman game 1, obviously. I think you got to do it. I think he is the guy. He is the guy that you are putting out there. And then I guess depending on who they're facing, that maybe dictates how you line up others. Like, you know, is it a very lefty heavy lineup? Who are you facing? And then, yeah, before you even named Nate Pearson and you said, who are you leaving off this list? My brain said Nate Pearson. So,
Right.
you know, because he has the options, because he has had moments where, you know, you could not trust him at all this season already, you know, has struggled out there. And yeah, you're already filling that role with Hicks. You don't Nate Pearson, you don't need him on the roster.
Yeah, I'm on board with that. I think Nate Pearson and Jay Jackson are probably those bubble bullpen pieces.
Yeah.
And then as for wild card, the 3 starters I'm going with, I think Jen nails it. You got to go Gausman game 1. Anyone who argues that is, I'm just going to say it, out to lunch. You got to go Kevin Gausman in game 1.
I was going way more rude with that than out to lunch. But.
Yeah. Jose Barrios in at number 2. I mean, the dude has been absolutely nails all year. He's having a career season. Completely has recovered from the face plant he did last year.
Gives me Faith Manoa can come back too. Sorry, keep cutting you off.
And then, I mean, for game 3, you probably go with the guy you're paying $21 million a year to be here in Chris Bassett. He's an old seasoned veteran. You probably got Kukuc ready to go in the bullpen. I mean, it's going to be interesting. You got Ryu, the wild card, and I'm excited to see what this team decides to do for a playoff roster when it comes to the division series. I don't even want to deal with the wild card. I say, screw it. Let's win this division and figure it out that way.
So you know what? I was thinking that earlier today, right? Like, you know, a month ago, I didn't think the division was at all attainable. I really, really didn't. You know, you just saw Tampa Bay absolutely running away with it. And now this position that everybody is in, especially that given that they have games against Baltimore. Now, they get swept by Baltimore. We're having a different conversation next Sunday, perhaps, you know, but
yeah, we'll go back to we should sell everything. It's too bad we missed the trade deadline. Yeah.
But, you know, 4.5 games back with games to play against them. I like it. I like that position that they're in. If you would, back to that question earlier in the show, if you had said at the outset of the season that at this point they'd be 4.5 games out of first in the division, how would you feel about that? I would have felt really good, except if you then told
we would have envisioned the Yankees being chased. Yeah.
If you told me they were actually in third, then I would have been like, oh, that's interesting.
That's weird.
Not great. You know, and who knows what the Yankees are going to be able to do? I don't know. So, you know, but yeah, anyways, now I'm rambling.
No, I'm with you. I'm with you. And for everyone here right now, I know that you're not going to be watching this, but it is 7-0 for the Orioles in the second inning against the Yankees right now. So
well, there you go.
It's probably 5.5 back by the end of this thing. Anyways,
well, hopefully the Orioles will tire themselves out from all that hitting by the time they roll into town.
Come in tired, Orioles. That's the dream. All right. Thank you so much, all of you, Joel, Jen, and of course, our good friend Chris. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone. For those of you who are watching right now, we will be back next week live. You can feel free to join us then. Obviously, we do it 6 to 8 East every single Sunday, and you can join us on YouTube. Otherwise, all the best. We'll see you folks for Mailbag. Cheers.